This was something really scary.
Attention. Do I have everybody's attention now?
Hey now, it's overtime with Mike and JD, and I'm your host, Mike Gilbert, and I'm here with JD Oliva. What's up, JD?
Nothing. We've been talking for the last 2 hours.
yeah. We're getting. If you guys are noticed that if you're watching this on the YouTube version on Patreon, and you notice that JD and I are wearing the same exact outfits that we're for our last two podcasts. Well, it's not because we don't change our clothes. It's just because we missed on Sunday. We're supposed to record this last Sunday, episode 2, but we just couldn't do it because of all the different things we had going on. So, but here we are. We're pulling a late one. We're doing a lot, doing our third podcast in a row. But man, we're going to talk about episode 3 of Who Killed WCW, and this was the Vince Russo show. I felt like this was like episode 2 was kind of them trying to do the reclamation project for Eric Bischoff. I felt episode 3 was very much like Vince Russo trying to, poorly sell his case poorly, and everybody calling bullshit on him the entire episode. I loved it. I thought it was good.
Here's the thing. We can get mad about Bischoff being a grifter and not very talented, but he's way smoother than Vince Russo. Vince Russo is one of the least likable human beings in the world. And every time he tries to blame somebody else, everybody goes, this guy's full of shit, man. Like Bischoff can snow you. Russo is just so like smarmy.
Well, that's the thing is like at least Bischoff had a little bit of success, and Bischoff had some good ideas when he had total control of the company.
It's true.
Vince Russo never did. Like the moment he came into charge, he never had any good. Now he might have had some good ideas when he was working under Vince McMahon, but those were filtered ideas. Vince McMahon would kill probably 99 of his ideas, and then he'd get number 100 through, and they would go with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he got beaver cleavage through, man. I'm zero convinced that Vince Russo has any talent whatsoever.
Oh man, dude, I can't go back and watch that Attitude Era stuff.
Because it's bad. It's awful. Anything that doesn't involve Steve Austin, The Rock, or Mick Foley is absolute trash.
Yeah.
It's so bad. And a lot of the stuff involving those guys is bad too.
It legitimately doesn't hold up. You know what I mean? Some of the moments are still really cool. I like seeing some of the like 90s WWE clips and stuff like that people put out there. Like the moments are good, but then you go back like, here, maybe I should watch that episode of Raw.
Awful.
And then you go back and watch it. Like, I'm a 41-year-old man. What am I doing? Like, you got Goldust and Luna Vachon and ball gags wrestling.
Vince Russo's a genius. He'll tell you so. Like, WWF in 1988 absolutely sucks. And here's like WWF outside the main events was not good until the Radicalz come over in 2000.
Yeah.
Like, and coincidentally, Vince Russo's gone, and you've got, I forget the name of the guy who was booking after him, but he was much better. And then Stephanie takes over, and it's fine. It's not as good as it was when I can't remember his name. I'm drawing a blank.
Who did take over? Because he left and he took Ed Ferrara with him, but it wasn't Brian Gortz because Gortz.
No, it wasn't Gortz yet. He was
on the team, but he wasn't in charge.
There was a guy between them who I know. I can hear Bix and Chris yelling at me right now from the ether. I can't think of his name. It's 12:30 at night here in Illinois, and I'm drawing a blank. But I mean, so those shows are not good until 2000. Right? They're not good television. It just isn't. Like I listened to Between the Sheets, speaking of Chris and Bix, like when they do the late 90s stuff, it's like painful to listen. Like the WCW TV show was much better before that. Like, and then Russo comes over, and then the show is completely unwatchable. I will say this. There's one good thing to come out of the Russo era. Do you know what that is? Sting switched to Seek and Destroy as the theme song.
Yeah, you know what? And for my money, I know our theme song here is the original Sting, but Seek and Destroy is my favorite Sting theme song. And when he came out, in his final match. He came out to Seek and Destroy, and I was like, thank you, Tony Khan.
Yeah.
God love you. And he did that at Wembley last year too. Yeah.
Tony knows when to write that check. Like every now and then we get the final countdown, and it's like Tony knows when to make that count. And I appreciate that about Tony as a wrestling fan, that he's not afraid to write a check when we need an emotional moment. But yeah, Sting switches to Seek and Destroy, has a nonsensical heel run for a little bit that doesn't go anywhere.
No.
And it's just, God, what a fucking nightmare of a show this was.
Yeah. So episode 2, they leave with Eric Bischoff riding off into the sunset, heading to the mountains of Wyoming or back to his ranch or whatever. He's going fishing, folks, because Harvey Schiller has fired his ass. Not because WCW executives were out to get him and that they wanted to kill WCW. They fired him because WCW was losing shitloads of money.
He wrote a giant check to Kiss for no reason.
Yes. Yeah. So that's why he got fired. And in this episode, Vince Russo comes out. Vince Russo has said he wants to leave WWF because WWF has added SmackDown, a second show, because they want to compete with Thunder. And they said, hey, we want you to write this show, but we're not going to pay you any extra money for it. And I'm on Vince Russo's side. He said, go piss up a rope. And he said, I'm leaving. And then he was able to finagle his way over into WCW and get a fucking big time paying gig as the head of creative over there. Vince Russo also in this episode claims that he had a hand in Eric Bischoff getting fired. And Vince, I'd love to give you credit for that, but Eric Bischoff is the one that gets all the credit for that one. You had nothing to do with that, buddy.
Boy, Vince Russo, I mean, he'll tell you he was something to do with everything. Like, he is convinced he was actually in the control room when the Apollo 11 landed on the moon. He'll tell you that. He was the second gunman on the grassy knoll. Like, he'll tell you about that. Like, he loves just to take credit for shit. Like, success has how many fathers, Mike?
100.
Vince Russo.
Yeah, Vince Russo is the daddy of all success.
That's one.
And has never had a bad idea. And that was the thing on this episode. It was one bad idea being presented after another, and then him trying to justify it. Just crappy idea after crappy idea after crappy idea. So the guy comes in, and then he didn't immediately put himself on TV, but his face wasn't being shown, but he automatically became a character on the show pretty quickly when he was doing the creative control gimmick. I think wasn't it with the Harris brothers?
The Harris brothers and the powers that be. He's basically Dr. Claw for my 80s fans. He's basically doing Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget. Yeah.
So he was on the show very quickly. They did that whole horrendous tournament that they were doing because they got they held the titles up. I think they held the title up after I think Goldberg and Sid main evented Halloween Havoc 99. I just remember liking that match because it was bloody. I can't really remember. And then they did this big tournament that was going to end in Toronto and with Bret Hart versus Chris Benoit, which was I found to be a really good match. But
that is a good match actually.
Yeah, but then after that it was like all downhill. He ends up getting shit canned like a month or two later
because he was bad at his job.
Yeah, well he was saying that the ratings went up. They really didn't.
They didn't go up. He says that.
They had. I'm sure they had some peaks, but the show was so trashy. They couldn't sell commercial time, and that's what Brad Siegel was saying. It's like, yeah, maybe the ratings went up a little bit, but we couldn't sell ads because it was so trashy.
He cut the show in a third. They took the show from 3 hours and they cut it in half. And he said, look, the ratings went up. And it's like, yeah, because you went unopposed and it didn't go up. You made them less money.
Yes.
Because you had less time.
All he cared about was the ratings points, right? Guess what the TV execs care about? Ad revenue. And even if the ratings did go up a little bit, they got less money for it. So it didn't fucking matter. And then on top of that, they quit selling pay-per-views.
And tickets.
Yeah.
Ticket sales went down. Pay-per-view revenue went down. He's like, well, I was the TV writer, bro. I just want to... No, you are not just the TV writer. Your job is to direct the show. You didn't do a good job directing the show. You made it worse. You made less people watch.
Yeah.
Dork.
Yeah, people quit coming to the arenas. He thinks his only job was to get ratings, but no, your job is to ratings are important. Ad revenue is more important. Ticket sales are important, and pay-per-view sales are important. All of them are important. You can't forego the other stuff to focus on this one metric. All the metrics are important. Right? Merchandise sales are important. Video game sales are important. He was foregoing all that other stuff because all he cared about was getting buzz, attention, and ratings points.
but they didn't go up. Like, that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's like he says that. It's like, I'm gonna tell people I'm 6'3". Like, I'm 5'9", but I'm gonna keep telling people I'm 6'3". And if I just keep saying it, eventually someone's gonna actually see me and go, well, of course JD's 6'3". He says it all the time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and so I've the one of the things that Meltzer wrote in the Observer last week, which I thought was pretty profound. He said, you know, people are pointing the finger at Vince Russo for killing WCW, and he did not. He just was unable to save it. He was brought in to save the company because he had sold himself as being the genius behind the WWF boom, when he really wasn't. He was like an offensive coordinator calling some plays, and then the head coach made the ultimate calls, which was Vince McMahon.
he's a Patriots offensive coordinator. How many Patriots OCs got head coaching jobs and didn't do jack shit?
Literally all of them, like Bill O'Brien, Josh McDaniels, Charlie Weiss. Like I think there might Matt Patricia.
Yep.
Yeah, I think there might be a couple more, but in their defensive coordinators, none of them have done anything either. Like, it was all, it was Belichick and Brady.
Tom Brady.
With the Attitude Era, it was Vince, it was Stone Cold, and it was The Rock. That's who got the Attitude Era over.
It's amazing how successful you can be when you're working with Hall of Fame level talent.
Yeah. And I guarantee you, Stone Cold and The Rock called bullshit on a lot of Vince Russo's ideas. Because if you don't think, they also had some type of creative control, not total, but they had some type. If you said something to Stone Cold and he didn't want to do it, he'd tell you to go eat shit. And same with The Rock, right?
Very, very famously, Steve Austin, if he didn't like what you told him to do, he told you to eat shit.
Yeah. So you had to bring good ideas. But when Vince Russo comes over to WCW, he's got autonomy. And nobody can say no. And the people that could say no, like the veterans, were kind of ostracized and kind of pushed out. Those guys that would want to say no. Which, led us to the stuff that happened in 2000. So anyway, by the beginning of 2000, he's gone. And then Kevin Sullivan comes back and takes over as the booker. And Kevin Sullivan had a little bit of success a couple years prior to that, but a lot of that had to do with the NWO and all that stuff.
He was the booker of the NWO. So, I mean, that's the thing, is we talk about this, success having 100 fathers. Yeah, I got it. Like, you could give Kevin Sullivan is the guy that actually put those shows together. Kevin Sullivan is responsible for the rise in tickets, for the rise in the house show business, which happened before the NWO. That was the Ric Flair, Randy Savage feud in the spring of '96.
You know what? That is a very underrated feud, by the way. And I think more people should talk about that. I thought that feud was great.
It's the better feud. Like, it's way better. They had a long, Savage and Flair have a long feud in WWF in '92. Yeah. And it's pretty solid. It's not, for the time, it's fine. Their 96 feud was way better because it was about how much of a broken man Savage was. Like, Flair literally does take Liz from him.
Yes.
Like, and how he's left with nothing. And like, it reignited WCW's house show business because nobody else is working house shows except for your workhorses, your quality, guys, Savage and Flair. Those guys went around the horn, and that was what got WCW. Nobody talks about this because it's cute to say Eric Bischoff and it's cute to say the NWO and Hall and Nash. What turned around their business, and this is true, what turned around WCW's ticket selling business was Flair and Savage, booked by Kevin Sullivan. And Kevin Sullivan's not a great guy either, by any stretch of the imagination, but he deserves some credit for turning around the business as well. If we're going to give it to Eric Bischoff, we got to give it to Kevin Sullivan too.
Yeah, he was very much a part of it. And then, so anyway, he gets the book back in 2000 after Vince Russo gets sent home. And immediately he gets the book back, and Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, Perry Saturn. And what people don't remember is Shane Douglas and Conan also were part of that group. They quit, but they didn't get jobs at WWE, so they went right back. But they all immediately quit, even though Chris Benoit was the champion, and like Bill Bush was just like, yeah, we'll just let them out of their contracts, and they immediately go over to WWF.
Oh,
and I think
that's not the story, Mike.
Tell the story.
The story. Okay, so
the knife. Sorry.
Yeah. So Kevin Sullivan gets the booking job at WCW. And he had a lot of problems with the Benoit crew. And at the time, we were under the impression as fans that it was because none of the mid-carders got pushed. In reality, the story was that Benoit, and this is hard to talk about now, but Benoit took his wife, right? Yeah. Kevin Sullivan booked booked his divorce. But Kevin Sullivan was also abusive. He abused Nancy Sullivan. Like Nancy. The sad thing is Nancy actually went to Chris to end the cycle of abuse. And knowing what we know now happened is it makes it even more tragic. But a lot of that was like they were rallying behind their friend in Chris Benoit, who say it's so hard to talk about this, but you have to look at this in 2000 eyes, not 2007 eyes. Like Chris Benoit saved Nancy from an abusive relationship. God, that's so weird to say, but that's what happened. So all of his friends were like, and again, they weren't getting pushed either. But I mean, like, this was a big source of conflict. So Kevin Sullivan, in his mind, is offering an olive branch to keep these guys happy. Is he puts, quote unquote, his worst enemy over as the champion in their first night. And these guys are like, fuck you. We're out of here. And then Mike Graham, the late Mike Graham, threatens to kill them all for leaving.
Yeah,
if I had a knife, I would
pull the shank, right?
I don't know if he actually pulled one, I don't know if he pulled a knife or if he just threatened them and said, I got a gun. It was something to that effect, but he threatened them and they went to they didn't take Mike Graham seriously, but they went to Turner HR and said, Mike Graham threatened to murder us. So then Bill Bush said, well, if you don't sue WCW, we'll just let you guys out of your contracts.
Yeah.
And they let all of them out. And then Vince said, Dean Douglas, no, we have bad blood with him. Conan, I spent a lot of money on that Max Moon suit, and he left. So we don't want those guys.
Yeah, but we'll take a flyer on these guys, and I think they had an eye on Benoit anyway, because Benoit really was becoming a top star.
Do you remember '95? Chris Benoit almost signed with WWF. He had tryout matches with. You remember who his manager was when his tryout matches?
His manager, what was it? Scotty Flamingo.
Ted DiBiase.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, because his tryout matches never really made air, did they?
They never made air. He just did dark matches. They were testing him out, and they were going to program him with Ted DiBiase. I have a hunch. I cannot prove this, but I have a hunch that if Chris Benoit signs in the fall of '95, he is the ringmaster.
You know what? I think I've heard that story before, because Steve Austin doesn't come until like later in '95.
96.
Well, he started in early '96, but he was signed by like the end of. He was 95.
Signed, yeah, but he's not on the TV.
He debuted, I think, in like the Royal Rumble in '96 or something like that. Yeah, so something like around that time, but
like around that time.
Yeah, I do remember him having a tryout because he was in ECW. He had been in WCW previous. He'd been in the light heavyweight tournament and done plenty of stuff with WCW and the
tag team with Bobby Eaton.
Yeah, in like 92, 93, but then he goes to Japan, and then he went to ECW for a while, and he started making a name for himself in Japan and ECW. And of course, Bischoff loved bringing in the guys from Japan and Mexico and ECW, so that was a perfect fit. But yeah, so
when Tony does it, it's bad, according to Bischoff.
Yeah, like, oh, they don't have enough vignettes. Shut up, Eric, idiot. But so yeah, they immediately quit. They go over to WWF, and at that point, like, WCW was already dying, but at that point, it's just like
it's over.
It's time to take this company out into behind the barn, because they lost a significant part of their culture, right? Their entire mid card, their world champion, quit the company, and they go over to the WWF, and then like they go over the next week, and WWF breaks a ratings record. It was 8.1 in the main event, and then of course, Triple H already gets his victories over all those guys as soon as they come over.
God damn it, Mike! Fuck, I hate that guy.
Immediately comes over and Triple H starts beating him.
A few months later, he beat Taz when he was the ECW champion too.
Yeah,
like God, I hate that guy so much.
Yeah. So funny. So anyway, Sullivan's takes over, and it's the show. Even though I felt like as a viewer, I enjoyed it better than the Russo stuff, but like it continued to tank. I think they put Flair and Dusty back on top, and like Terry Funk's in there and all that. So it starts to go even more downhill, and then they do like this big great reset where they think they're going to hire, or they end up hiring Bischoff and Russo to come back as a tandem, and it was just a disaster from day one.
I went to the first pay-per-view. It was in Chicago with the Russo Bischoff era.
The New Blood Rising.
The New Blood Rising pay-per-view was in Chicago. They had the tournaments because they vacated every belt because Vince Russo's an idiot. And like they had to refill them all. I remember my brother Matt and I went. It was so awful.
Yeah.
I do remember he bought this Vampiro t-shirt at the pay-per-view that he wore for maybe the next 9 years, to the point where it was so ratty and disgusting. But he wore it, I swear to God, 3 times a week. It became like a running gag between friends and family with Matt's disgusting Vampiro shirt.
The Vampiro was like one of those guys that I thought I really liked from that era. I was a Vampiro fan.
Me too. Who wasn't? He was cool back then.
Yeah.
Like
yeah,
in 2000, cool. They had the crew with Vampiro and the Great Muda.
The Misfits.
Yeah.
Jerry Only.
The Misfits. Yeah. Jerry Only from the actual Misfits.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a weird time in WCW.
Yeah. Yeah, like Jerry Only was wrestling, and you had the Insane Clown Posse wrestling and all that stuff.
And the Great Muda. And it's just so weird.
Yeah. And you had, Sting and Vampiro feuding, and they did like this nail in the coffin match, and they were doing the blood stuff. They had the Millionaires Club versus the New Blood Rising. They covered that on the episode. And that I just like I get the premise and I get the idea, but boy, did they execute it poorly.
They booked it backwards.
Yeah.
It's so stupid. Like, it was so bad. Like, Hogan's like, I'm going to work a program with Billy Kidman, brother. And then Billy Kidman got a lot out of working with Hulk Hogan. Like, that was some of the worst TV ever. Good God.
And then, of course, I think we've talked about Bash of the Beach 2000 like a couple of times already, so we're not going to rehash that one. That's probably its own episode. But the whole thing with Bash of the Beach 2000 happens. And then that's basically where, like, there were irreconcilable differences between Bischoff and Russo. Like, there's just no turning back at that point.
Well, Russo was mean to Hogan. And Bischoff's not going to have that. You can't be mean to Hogan and expect Eric Bischoff to like you.
Have you ever seen like a story where you just hate all the characters? Like that's Bash of the Beach 2000 with Hogan, Bischoff, and Russo. It's like, how can all of you guys be wrong all at the same time? They were only worried about their own bullshit. They were not worried about the people that paid money to see them.
I just want a plane to land in the middle of the arena and just take all 3 of those guys out. Everyone else is going to be safe. Just land on Bischoff's office during that argument, and just Jeff, someone save Jeff and Booker. The rest of them can just talk about 3 unlikable turds.
Yeah, and then Bischoff ends up leaving, and Vince Russo now is like on an island by himself. He completely is out of control, makes himself the world heavyweight champion. And this is the quote of the entire series so far, where they asked Vince Russo why he was on TV so much. He goes, bro, it's because I'm a better TV character than 80% of the performers on there, bro. Those are legit words that man said.
Michael, I watch those shows because I'm a glutton for punishment. I lived through that era. Did like the Natural Born Thrillers, thought they had something.
Yeah.
Vince Russo is one of the worst GM style characters that professional wrestling has ever seen. Eric Bischoff was actually pretty good at being
I think he's very
the
good,
unlikable boss. Like, he actually was pretty good in that role. Vince is like the master of it. The Raw, remember when they had a computer that was the GM of Raw?
Yeah.
That computer was more charismatic and interesting than Vince Russo.
Yeah, I didn't think he was good at all.
No,
he made himself world champion, and thank God for Bill Goldberg.
He came out to Iron Man. This motherfucker booked himself to come out to Iron Man. Like, there's very few songs. Like, when you're in pro wrestling, especially when it comes to like mainstream songs, like there's some things that just get associated with guys. Stranglehold, that's the Von Erichs, right?
Yeah.
Like Kevin Von Erich, Strangle. Like, I was going to think of that. Like, Eye of the Tiger, early Hulk Hogan. There's just the Cult of Personality, CM Punk, right? Bryan Danielson.
Another one bites the dust is JYD.
Junkyard Dog. Bryan Danielson with the Final Countdown. There's just certain songs get connected with certain guys. This motherfucker tried to take the Road Warriors theme song. The fucking Road Warriors. The unbelievable massive ego on that turd bucket is just astounding to me.
Yeah. The guy got in charge and then immediately just made everything all about himself. And I think it might have been Meltzer that was saying this on his podcast. Instead of booking for
demorred it, is what you're telling me?
Dude, very much. Like, he wasn't booking to sell tickets, to sell ads. He wasn't booking to sell pay-per-view. He was booking to get vengeance on people and live out his dreams. Yep. That's what he was booking for. And with similar, like I think TNA was way better than WCW 2000.
It was. I'm being harsh on
but
that,
like
but
D'Amore, when he took over, he immediately started booking himself all over television, and he booked himself in the co-main event of the second biggest pay-per-view of the year in his hometown, and he won the match. So
do you remember? I used to compare those TNA episodes to the Muppet Show, and Scott D'Amore is basically like Kermit the Frog.
Yeah,
Like that was what it was. He was the center. He was the center of those TNA shows, as was Vince Russo. As Tony Schiavone once said, Vince Russo was struck again. But I mean, Scott is way more likable than fucking Vince Russo.
Well, I think Scott D'Amore is also a much better television performer. Vince Russo was never good. He was never good in WCW. And then he went into the early days of TNA in like those Asylum years, and he was awful. He was one of the worst television performers I've ever seen. And he just, for some reason, he just had this like stranglehold over Jeff Jarrett. Jeff just liked the guy and kept hiring him. And then, of course, he got his hooks into Dixie Carter, too. I don't know what it is about this guy, but he just kept getting job after job after job.
He must be remarkably charming in person.
I've heard that about him. Yeah. I think even Eric Bischoff said that about him. He doesn't look like it on TV.
No, it never comes off. Like you listen to the man talk and you're just like, ugh. But I mean, maybe it's like when you see a really dork or ugly dude who's got like a hot chick and you're like, how did this happen? Like
it's either got big money or big hog.
Big money or big personality, good charisma.
Big personality, yeah.
You know, that actually matters for chicks.
So I think the biggest revelation, and we'll close it on here, we do got to go. The biggest revelation that came out of the show was that the idea to put the World Heavyweight title on David Arquette was from Tony Schiavone.
I have heard that. Yeah. Tony said in his podcast, he said he meant it as a joke. He wasn't serious about it, but
man, that's one of those things like years later, it's like, shit, I should tell everybody I was joking.
You don't want to lay claim to that. You're like,
no. Yeah. No, yeah, but it was his idea. And then Vince Russo goes and pitches it to Eric Bischoff, and then Bischoff likes it. Bischoff was Bischoff was in the match. I'm like, what are they doing? It was Jarrett and Bischoff versus DDP and David Arquette. And whoever got the pin was the world champion. It's like, if you want to know what WCW 2000 was like, that right there explains everything that you need to know about why that company went the way that it did.
And Bruce was like, we are on the cover of USA Today. You weren't. You were a blurb. You were a blurb in USA Today where they didn't even say WCW. Like, they just made fun of it and moved on. Like, it did nothing. It did nothing positive. It didn't increase ratings. It tanked pay-per-view buy rates. It was an absolute freaking disaster.
And you turned off your most loyal fans. Like, I was pretty much like, I was on the outs, but I'll be honest, like, I didn't have a whole lot going on in my life, so I still watched. But like, I could not stand the show. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, why am I making myself miserable watching this crap? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's like, I like David Arquette. I think he's funny.
Arquette's fine. Yeah, he's fine. He's not the world heavyweight champion. And now look what happened to the man. He got hooked up with RJ City and did death matches to try to make amends with all of us.
You know what? But I kind of liked that he made that comeback. I thought that was kind of cool. And it was for that documentary that he did. Yeah, so he was trying to like right the wrongs of his past because he's such a big fan. And I also like the fact, and they didn't talk about this in the documentary, that the money that David Arquette made from those appearances, he donated to Pillman's widow and Pillman's family. And I think that's cool.
It is cool. Yeah. And that should have been said because David Arquette is a good human being. He really is. He just got lumped in with all this shit. And the story, too, is like he asks Booker, how many times have you won this thing? And Booker says, I've never won that belt. And then David Arquette's like, oh, my God, what have I done? Like he realizes the gravity of the situation and he's like, I can't have this thing.
Yeah. Right. And then he actually goes on TV and he's like, Booker T should be the world champion. And then sure enough, they ended up making him the world champion, Bash to the Beach 2000 on.
Which was the move. Like Booker was the guy they should have gone with because they had nobody else. They needed a fresh guy. They needed to make a guy. And they chose the right two guys, him and Scott Steiner. Those are the guys. I mean, you still had Bill Goldberg there, but you already screwed that pooch too many times over.
Yeah, but they, by the time Booker had it, they had devalued the WCW title so much because it just kept hot potatoing it, switching hands so many times. Booker T was a 5-time WCW champion from the year 2000 to 2001. From the summer of 2000 to the spring of 2001, Booker had won that title 5 times.
Less than 9 months.
Yeah.
Less than a school year, mind you.
Yeah. So, but that was just the philosophy that nothing mattered. Titles didn't matter. All it was about shocking segments and horseshit. And that was the entire Vince Russo booking philosophy.
To this day. Didn't draw in WCW. Didn't draw in TNA. Didn't draw when he did that little thing in Colorado. Like, Vince Russo is one of the worst things to happen in the history of professional wrestling. But he is not responsible for killing WCW.
No, he in fact did not kill WCW. He just failed to save it. And that's where we will leave you guys this week. We will be back next week for the conclusion of Who Killed WCW, where we should find out what the conclusion of the show is. I think, and then JD and I will tell you the real answer next. So stay tuned, Patreon. Stay tuned next week. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us on this episode of Who Killed WCW. And until next time, mahalo.
I want to see something really scary.